guys, today I wanted to talk to you about my super centers. I've had a ton of requests to do a video on my super centers, and I am so excited that I am finally getting the chance to sit down and do one for you guys. So the idea of my super centers came from a meeting that I went to about 2 years ago. And before that, I had been doing the Daily 5, which consisted of word work. It consisted of listening to reading, partner reading, independent reading, just various little activities that kids had to do throughout the day. I also had a checklist for my Daily 5s. So I had broken up my schedule to where I had 3 mini lessons, and then in between each mini lesson, my kids would go out and have a rotation, is what we called it. And I would be pulling a small group at that time too. So while I was working in a small group, I had various areas where kids were working at. And they had the choice. So at that time, it was that big, huge word of choice, giving kids choice to be able to pick to where they wanted to go. Now, it was guided choice in that I pushed my kids and kind of steered them the way I wanted them to go. So they had to, definitely have word work. They can only independent read once, and they can only do it once a day. So they couldn't very well go to word work all 3 different rotations. They could only do it for once, and then they had to choose something different. So it was still guided choice in a sense. I had a love-hate relationship for Daily 5 because, a lot of the times I would look up from small group and I would get so frustrated because a lot of my kids were just kind of, doing that where they were just kind of looking and they weren't really doing anything, or, they're sitting at word work and they're taking your expo marker and they're drawing huge circles on their paper, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is why my expo markers don't work. And, you have those kids who are partner reading and they're not, they're playing with the finger things, they're twirling around at big books, they are, kind of just flipping through the books, they're sitting there talking and chatting about other things, they're not really doing much. And I was so frustrated with that. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? I'm trying to keep them engaged. I'm putting all kinds of fun activities in there. They are, building words and they're looking for them and they're, doing all kinds of various activities. Well, I went to this conference, and one of the breakout sessions was a lady by the name of April DeCesar. I hope I'm saying that right. DeCesar? I think that's right. Well, anyway, so April had this idea of something that she called smart centers. And it was a great idea in the fact that she had 4 tubs, and inside each tub, it was based around a content. So a science or social studies standard, and all of the activities kind of were about that content. And so she would have 4 of them, and she had her kids break out to where, they had groups. And you had that whole week to complete all these various assignments that were in this Smart Center. And then they would rotate those 4 for that month. So essentially, you would only have to create 4 for the month, and you would just rotate your kids through those 4 for that group. I loved it, although, me, I'm all big about making sure that it works for you and figuring out what's best. And for me, having all of those rotations going on at one time was too much for me. And it was, they're kindergarten, they still need a lot of that guided practice. They need a lot of instruction in showing them how to get things done. So I sat back and I thought, well, how am I going to make this fit for kindergarten? How am I going to make this work for kindergarten? I liked the idea of having it as content because, a lot of the times there's so many cool activities to do with content, but half the time, you're struggling to get there because you're having to do reading, you're having to do math. And I really enjoyed the idea, and I really liked the idea that my kids, everything was integrated, everything kind of tied in together, and it was just this great big cycle, if you want to think of it. So I sat back and I thought, okay, how am I going to make this fit? Here's the idea of it. The first day you want to read, building a lot of that knowledge about that content. The next day you're wanting to write. The next thing you're wanting to have a challenge. You're wanting to have some type of an activity. So I kept thinking, well, I still need to make sure that I'm putting a little bit of that practice of, my phonics skills need to be in there, because, you still have some of those kids who really struggle with phonics skills. So I really wanted to make sure that my phonics skills were still applying to it. I wanted to give them that opportunity to write. And then I also wanted to incorporate the depth of knowledge. If you haven't heard about Webb's depth of knowledge, it's kind of related to Bloom's taxonomy, but it's different. For Bloom's taxonomy, it focuses more on the task, and it also focuses on the verb for the level of thinking that students are using. For Webb's depth of knowledge, they're focusing more on cognitive demands, which means that they're using more of the thinking process rather than the verb. It's how are the students getting to that answer. So really, it's going beyond Bloom's taxonomy and the fact that it's going beyond the verbs. It's going beyond the what, and it's more focusing now on the how. It's no longer about, just where did you find that? It's more of how did you understand that? How did you come to that conclusion? And then how can you expand your thinking? So it's more the how than the what and the verb. So I like the idea of Webb's depth of knowledge. So I wanted to incorporate that into my super center. So I sat down, came up with this whole idea, and really it was a reading workshop model, because at that time I was really big into, I'm big into Debbie Miller and Stephanie Harvey. They were just some really big gurus, and they just have some amazing thinking that they do with their reading workshop, and the way that they get their kids to really expand their knowledge and really go dig deeper into some of those standards. So I wanted to make sure that I was using some type of a reading workshop model. I still wanted to continue having my small groups, but I also wanted that in the second half of the semester, where your students are already starting to become really great readers, I also wanted to incorporate a lot of flex grouping, because that's about where all my kids are starting to jump around so many different levels, but they still may need some practice on certain skills. So I wanted to be able to do a lot of flex grouping as well. So here was the idea of it, and it goes really along the lines of Debbie Miller. And the idea is that you start together and you kind of give them their focus for that lesson. You give them that standard for that lesson. You conduct your mini lesson, and then you break out. And the way I do it is that I still want to make sure that my kids are getting at least 10 minutes of independent reading. So they sit down right away after our mini lesson, and they sit down. The entire class reads for 10 minutes of independent reading. This is where they're getting in that practice of reading their 3 just right books. They're practicing reading them 3 times, and then they can go and do some type of an activity with them. And this varies among students. Some students may only be telling me who the characters are. Some students may be using key details. Some are comparing stories. It depends on the student, and that's determined when we're sitting down with data binders and we're looking at what they need as far as their goals. So once my students have their 10 minutes of independent reading time, then I tell them, okay, your reading workshop is open. So this is the time when I'm pulling my small groups, and so kids are coming back and forth, that they are either partner reading, they are working on super centers, they're independent reading. Now my super centers incorporate so many various things. It incorporates reading, it incorporates writing, research. I wanted to make sure that I was using the Webb's depth of knowledge. So I have a super center that I wanted to show you guys, and I brought the one that I am using for this month, and it is on weather. So here was the idea. My concept is weather. I wanted to make sure that that was what was tying into my super centers, because I knew that that's what I was going to teach the entire week. That's what I was teaching in writing. That's what I was teaching in reading. And for those moments that I did have that afternoon where we did some type of a weather activity, it all still incorporated. But a lot of the times my afternoons, I don't really keep them for science and social studies because it's all integrated into reading and writing. So everything's integrated. That a lot of the times my afternoon time that I usually have for 20 minutes, that's my science social studies time, that's my data binders time. That's my time for them to complete some of their assignments, to continue doing some of their research that they're doing. So that's our exploration time is what we call it. So that's time for students to be able to get things done, to continue working on things that they haven't quite finished. And that's time for me to be able to assess and have one-on-one conferencing with my students. So let me get in and show you what my super centers are like. So on the first day, I don't introduce anything to them yet. I teach them the concept. We go over, we read it on Mondays. That's when we're reading our books. I am giving them as much information and they're just kind of digging into it. They're starting to look at it and they're starting to take notes of things. They're writing inside of their reading journals. So they're just building a lot of that knowledge on that concept that we're learning for science and social studies. The second day, I introduce to them all of the different activities that are going to be in their super centers. I try to keep 5 to 6, no more than 6. And if I do 6, it's very rare that I do it. But if I do 6, it's because some of the activities don't take as long, or I just want to extend some of their thinking. So this week I had a ton of activities because I love weather. I love the tons of activities that are out there for weather. So I really wanted to incorporate a lot of those. So here's what I came up with. So for their first one, and this is going to be that lower level of Webb's depth of knowledge. It's level 1, and that's just recall. It's just being able to recall information. So the first one that I used was a weather syllable sort. So this is building some of that vocabulary. In that first day, we build a lot of that vocabulary in writing. So we have our big weather words chart that we made during writing on Monday. And so we go back over it. And this is where they simply cut it across, they clap the syllables, and they glue it to where it goes. Just something simple that they can practice, but then it's just a skill that they also need to have some type of an independent practice with, so that I know whether or not they're understanding that skill. The next thing that I have inside of their super centers is okay, so I guess maybe I should tell you guys about this first. So for the week of American symbols, and I think I shared this in one of my vlogs, but I found this phenomenal thing called Smart Art, and I had never seen it, never heard of it before, but I fell in love with the idea. But you know, a lot of the times you want to have those cute crafts that you want to put up in your room, but who has time for tons of crafts? I don't have time for tons of crafts because I'm so busy trying to either assess or make sure that my kids are understanding all the different skills that we're teaching for that week. So Smart Art was a way for me to incorporate them learning and then them also getting in that little craft as well. So I came up with a rhyming sort. So right now I still have a few friends that are struggling with rhyming. My kids love to do rhyming activities, and we just finished Dr. Seuss as well, which we did a lot of rhyming activities in our super center. So here's the one that I came up with for weather. And this one is just a big sun, and I already had the circles pre-cut and I had the rectangles pre-cut. This was on a cardstock and they had to cut that out themselves for the cloud. But I literally just post it up on my board and they get to see exactly what the product is supposed to look like. And at this point, second part of the year, they're really good at knowing how to just look at something and just being able to follow those directions because we've done it so many times. So for this one, again, it's just that basic lower level depth of knowledge, but it's just a rhyming sort. So they also had a strip of paper that had about I think 10 or 12 words on it, and they had to sort the words on words that rhymed with sun and that did not rhyme with sun. So in the end, you have a really cute little activity that you can just post up in your classroom or post it in the hall, but it's something simple and that they're doing during their reading workshop time. But they're also applying various skills. They're having to being able to listen to sounds, stretching out words, reading words. They're having to connect your phonics with your letters and sounds. They have to be able to do that. So a lot of things are going into just this one activity. So it's extremely useful and it's beneficial, and I think it's cute, to be honest. So let's just be real. Sometimes we just like to be cute. I know I like to be cute. So the next Super Center that I had for this week was one that I really enjoyed, and I did it on purple because I didn't have gray paper. I'm not really even sure if Astro Brights has gray paper. I don't think I looked it up, and I haven't looked it up yet. So if they have gray paper, let me know. But I came up with twisting facts. So facts about twisters. And at that time we were learning about tornadoes, and we were building some of that knowledge during our snack time and during our reading time, and in the afternoon we were just learning so much about it and reading on it that I wanted my students to tell me 4 different facts about tornadoes. So for this activity, it was on a simple piece of paper. All I did was copy it, and I stuck the paper in there. I stuck these that were already pre-cut, and I stuck the popsicle sticks inside of the drawer. And they went in, they pulled out their paper, they completed their writing, they cut it out, and they went and glued everything. So again, it's just another activity that is super simple, that they are applying the knowledge that they're learning from reading workshop and from their content, and they're putting it into writing. So again, they're having to use a lot of different skills just to be able to do this one thing. Then it's something that you can put up in your classroom, you can post it in the hallway, and it's another little quick craft that they do in their classroom. The next Super Center that I had was my thunderstorm description. So we had been talking a lot about thunderstorms, and I focused more on thunderstorms and tornadoes because that's what my kids are gonna have a lot of connection with. You know, they're not gonna have a lot of connection with snow. They're not gonna have it with hurricanes because we just don't have that in this area. So when it came to thunderstorms and tornadoes, I wanted to make sure that my students really understood the topic because this was something that they were going to come in contact with. And so when we started talking about it, we began brainstorming, creating anchor charts for it. So the next one I did was my thunderstorm description. So again, all I did was copy it. I didn't cut it out for them. I didn't do anything. So here I showed them how I cut it. I cut it out. I also colored it gray. And then on the inside, they would open it up and write their thunderstorm description. And I always tell my kids, your magic number is 4. You have to give me 4 things that describe a thunderstorm. And then I had these pre-cut, so all they had to do was just take them and glue them down. It's again, another quick activity that's incorporating a lot of different and various skills and research that they have to do because they're also having to go back. Some of my kids couldn't tell me what a thunderstorm, you know, some things about thunderstorms. So at that point I said, well, why don't you go find some thunderstorm books that I've pulled, and they're over there on our bookshelf. So they would go and pull that information. They would create their sticky notes with their 6 sticky notes that had information based on what they had looked up, what they observed in the pictures, what they read in the books, and then that helped them to be able to complete this. So I'm also incorporating a lot of that research. They're reading, they're writing, they're speaking, they're listening, they're doing so many different tasks during reading workshops. So this was the next activity that we did. The next activity that I had for my Super Centers was an activity that I tied into my math time. So on Monday, my kids did a graph on which was their favorite weather, and they had to graph it. Then they completed a graph assignment during math time. And I wanted to incorporate that graph so that I can kind of have them refer back to it, but then I wanted them to put it into writing. So for that, I pulled out a my favorite weather sheet. So we had been doing a lot of opinion writings for the past 4 weeks, and now we're moving into how-tos. But for our opinion writings, this was tying in perfect with it because my kids already understood the idea of telling what their favorite weather was and then being able to give a support for it. So they had to tell me my favorite weather is rainy because I love the way the sound relaxes me. And that's totally my opinion right there. But they had to be able to write it and draw it for me. Again, it's just incorporating so many various skills that they're having to use on a day-to-day basis. The last Super Center that I had for this week, I created a quick sheet that just said, how would you stay safe during a tornado? So again, this is something that I was going to hit home for a lot of my kids because we have so many tornadoes during this season, and I really wanted to make sure that they understood what they were supposed to do during a tornado in order for them to be safe. So we'd already been watching a lot of videos, doing plenty of reading during reading at that time. So my kids already had some pretty good knowledge as far as what they could do. If they didn't, again, I would refer them back on the iPads to go and look up more videos. I would refer them back to their books to where they could research more in order to be able to complete this. But then it also gives me a really good understanding whether or not my kids are completely understanding that topic. So they would give me 3 things that they would do during a tornado in order to stay safe, and then they would draw those for me. So I'm incorporating a lot of reading and a lot of writing within my reading workshop time. So you may be thinking, holy moly, it is probably chaotic in my room. And to be honest, it's not. My kids are so quiet because they're engaged. They're doing something that is meaningful. They love the smart art. They love making cute, fun things. That keeps them engaged. So incorporating some of that smart art to it really gets my kids going. It gets them motivated, and my kids are quiet. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I do have a few kids that I have to stay on top of constantly. So here's my remedy for this. And if you have seen my February reflection, this is something that was in it, and it's been by far my favorite thing that I've been doing for my super centers. So in my drawers, and I'll put a picture of what my drawer system looks like here. So in my drawer system, there is a folder and there's a laminated sheet. So this is what it looks like. And along the side, it just says Super Center. And I wrote all of my kids' names on it. And then I just put a big 1. That's just indicating that this is Super Center number 1. And so all of the other Super Centers are going to have their designated number on it. And I took my laminated sheet and I just stapled it to a plain old file folder, nothing special. And what they do is as they're completing the assignment, they turn that item into the folder and they cross their name off. So as the day goes on, if during the afternoon I have a little bit of extra time to where I can sit down and flip through it really quick, I can quickly see who's getting their work done and who's not getting their work done. So by the end of the day, I can say, oh, Amanda and David, you need to make sure that you have Super Center turned in by today because you're not going to be able to get all your other assignments finished. So it keeps them accountable, and it gives me the opportunity to quickly check to see who's finishing these tasks. And it keeps them motivated even more because they're like, I really want to cross my name off that list. So they get so much more excited to get their centers done, get them turned in so that they can cross their name off. And at that point, when they are finished with their Super Center, they can go independent read, they can go write, they can go partner read. It is their choice at that point. So again, this was something that incorporated a lot of those content standards into my reading time. It kind of ties everything together, and it's giving them a lot of that reading, research, and writing practice. They're being able to listen, to talk about it with their partners, and they can do this with partners. They can do it in a small group setting if that's what they choose. They can choose to do it independently. It's their choice on how they want to go about their research and to completing the assignments. So I give my kids a lot of free choice at that time, and during all of this, I'm pulling small groups. So I'm saying, I want to meet with yellow group at this point. So then they stop what they're doing, they clean it up, and they come to my table, and I can start working with them immediately. Then they go back out and they continue with their Super Centers. I do my mini lesson at the very beginning of reading workshop, and then I don't go back to the carpet until the very end for our reflection. So my room at this point, like if you came in and you were looking at it, my kids are on task. You may see students who are sitting down partner reading. You may see students who are independent. You may see kids that are completing their writing at their tables and are cutting out their Super Center and craft and putting it all together for their final product. So they really are engaged and they're enjoying the process. And this has by far been some of my favorite times with reading in general. I told you that in the beginning with Daily 5, I felt like I was constantly having to tell my kids, I need you to stop doing that. I need you to stop doing this. No, you can't do this. I was wasting so much instructional time putting my kids to where they needed to go, making sure everybody was set up. And then I would go to small group, and then we would have to clean up to go do another whole group. At this point, you know, I do my whole group for 15 minutes, then we're done. We have all this time, and I can get in 4 groups extremely easy during my reading workshop time. And my kids that are out there are engaged and they're applying all of the skills that we're learning for that week. So it's incredible. I have absolutely loved it. So that is going to be it for my Super Centers. I hope you have a really great idea of what's going on in my room during reading workshop. If you have any questions about my Super Centers more in detail and I did not answer any of the questions that you may have, please leave them down below and I will answer them as soon as I can. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye! Do something a little bit different on my channel. I wanted to do something that we as teachers do so often in our profession, and that's reflect.